My stepsister moved into my guest house while I was away, claiming Dad promised IT to her. Mom begged me to let her stay, but when the property assessor showed up, she went pale. This guest house is my inheritance. Emily's voice echoed across my perfectly manicured lawn as she stood there, hands on her hips, looking every bit like the entitled princess she'd always been. Dad promised it to me before he passed away, and I'm not leaving. I stood at my kitchen window, my coffee cup frozen halfway to my lips, watching my stepsister and her boyfriend unload boxes from their beat-up van. I just returned from a 2-week business trip to find them breaking into my property as if they owned it. My name is Olivia Carter. I'm 34, and I own a successful real estate development company in Boston. The guest house they were currently invading wasn't just any property. It was part of my grandmother's estate, the one she left specifically to me, her only grandchild. "Did you hear me, Olivia?" Emily shouted, noticing me at the window. "Mom says you have to let us stay. It's what Dad would have wanted." I sat down my coffee cup, my hands steady despite the anger building inside me. What my stepsister didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd spent the last 6 months quietly documenting every attempt they've made to lay claim to my property. The signs had started shortly after Dad's funeral. Emily and her boyfriend had shown up unannounced asking for tours of the guest house. My mother, always eager to keep the peace, had encouraged me to be generous with my sister. But Emily wasn't my sister, not really. She was the daughter of my father's second wife, a woman who'd spent the last 15 years trying to erase every trace of my mother from our lives. I watched as Emily's boyfriend, Jake, struggled with a large TV, nearly dropping it onto my grandmother's prized rose bushes. Those roses had been her pride and joy, carefully tended for decades before she passed the responsibility to me. Now they were in danger of being trampled by people who had no right to be here. My phone buzzed, a text from my mother. "Please don't make a scene, honey. Emily's going through a rough time. They just need a place to stay until they get back on their feet." Back on their feet. That's what they'd said 6 months ago when Emily lost her job at the yoga studio, and 4 months ago when Jake's startup failed, and 2 months ago when they got evicted from their apartment for not paying rent. I dial my lawyer's number, keeping my voice low as I watch Emily direct Jake like a queen overseeing her servants. "Sarah, they're here just like you predicted." Sarah had been my grandmother's lawyer before becoming mine. She knew every detail of the estate, including the specific provisions my grandmother had put in place to protect it. "Do they have any paperwork?" she asked, her tongue professional but concerned. "Emily claims Dad promised it to her before he died," I replied, watching as more boxes appeared. "But you and I both know that wasn't his to promise." "No, it wasn't," Sarah confirmed. "Your grandmother's will was very clear. The entire property, including the guest house, belongs solely to you. She specifically excluded it from any future claims by your father or his new family." I remembered that day in Sarah's office shortly after my grandmother's passing. I'd been surprised by the detailed provisions she'd put in place, but my grandmother had always been shrewd. She'd watched how my father's new wife and stepdaughter had slowly taken over our family home, pushing out every memory of my mother until it felt like she'd never existed. "The property assessor will be there tomorrow morning," Sarah continued, "just like we arranged. Don't confront them tonight. Let them think they've won." As if on cue, Emily appeared at my back door, knocking insistently. I ended the call and turned to face her, schooling my features into careful neutrality. "We need the keys to the guest house," she announced, not bothering with pleasantries. "The ones we found only work on the front door." I raised an eyebrow. "The ones you found?" She had the grace of flesh slightly but pressed on. "Mom gave them to us, said they were Dad's spare set, but we need access to the garage too. Jake needs somewhere to set up his home office." Home office. That was rich. Jake hadn't held a real job in the 3 years I'd known him. His business ventures consisted mainly of failed cryptocurrency investments and questionable multi-level marketing schemes. "Emily," I said carefully, "that guest house isn't yours to claim. It belongs to me legally and officially." "That's not what Dad said," she shot back, her voice rising. "He told me specifically right before he died that I could have it. Said it would be my inheritance since you got everything else." Everything else? She made it sound like I'd stolen something from her. In reality, my grandmother had left me her estate because I've been the one to care for her in her final years. I've been the one to manage her properties, handle her medical appointments, and spend countless hours by her bedside while Emily and my stepmother complained about how inconvenient it all was. "Whatever Dad may or may not have said," I replied evenly. "He didn't have the authority to give away property that wasn't his." Emily's face darkened. "You've always been so selfish, Olivia. Just because you're some big-shot real estate developer doesn't mean you need all this space. It's not fair that you get everything while I get nothing." I thought about the trust fund my father had drained to pay for Emily's failed attempt at college, the family heirlooms my stepmother had redistributed to make Emily feel more included, the countless times I've been told to step aside, be understanding, let Emily have her way because she was sensitive. "Life isn't fair, Emily," I said finally, "but property law is very clear. Now if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." I closed the door on her protests, but not before hearing her shout, "Mom's right. You're just like your grandmother, cold and heartless." I smiled slightly at that. My grandmother had been anything but cold. She'd been protective, strategic, and wise enough to see exactly what kind of people my father had married into. That evening, I watched from my home office as Emily and Jake settled into the guest house like they owned it. They'd ordered pizza, cranked up their music, and were already rearranging the furniture my grandmother had carefully selected. My mother called 3 times, leaving increasingly anxious voicemails about family harmony and sharing blessings. I ignored them all, focusing instead on reviewing the documentation Sarah and I have prepared. Property deeds, tax records, utility bills, everything proving my sole ownership. But more importantly, we had evidence of Emily and my stepmother's previous attempts to claim the property. There were emails from my stepmother to real estate agents inquiring about helping her daughter sell her inherited guest house, text messages from Emily to friends bragging about her plans to convert it into an errand, even a crude attempt to forge my signature on some paperwork thankfully caught by my bank before any damage could be done. Around midnight, the music finally died down. I watched as Jake stumbled out to their van, probably retrieving more boxes when he did something that made my blood boil. He dropped his pizza box right on top of my grandmother's roses. I grabbed my phone and started recording, adding it to my growing file of evidence. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. The property assessor arrived promptly at a.m. the next morning. Mr. Thompson was a serious-looking man in his 60s carrying a briefcase full of official documents. I met him at the main house, carefully going over the paperwork Sarah had prepared. "Miss Carter," he began, his tone professional, "I understand you're reporting an unauthorized occupancy of your property." Before I could answer, Emily burst out of the guest house still in her pajamas with Jake trailing behind her looking confused. "What's going on?" she demanded. "Who is this?" "Mr. Thompson is from the county assessor's office," I explained calmly. "He's here to document the current occupation and use of the property." Emily's face went pale then red. "You called the authorities on your own sister?" "Stepsister," I corrected gently. "And yes, I'm documenting an illegal occupation of my property." "It's not illegal," she shouted. "Dad gave it to me." "Mom, tell her." I turned to see my mother hurrying across the lawn, still in her morning robe. "Olivia, please," she began. "Can't we discuss this as a family?" Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I have here the official property records showing Miss Olivia Carter as the sole owner of both the main house and guest house as inherited from Margaret Carter in 2021. Do you have any documentation showing a legal transfer of ownership?" Emily looked to our mother desperately. "Mom, the papers Dad signed, show them." My mother wrung her hands. "Well, your father, he meant to make it official, but with his illness he never signed anything." I interrupted because he couldn't. "This property wasn't his to give away." Mr. Thompson nodded, making notes. "And when did the current occupants begin residing in the guest house?" "They broke in yesterday while I was away on business," I stated clearly, using spare keys they obtained without my permission. "We didn't break in," Emily protested. "Mom gave us the keys." "Keys she had no right to distribute," I pointed out. "This is my property, Emily. I pay the taxes, the insurance, the maintenance costs. You can't just move in because you want to, but we have nowhere else to go," Emily wailed, tears starting to fall. It was a familiar scene. Emily crying, my mother rushing to comfort her, everyone expecting me to give in and fix the situation. Not this time. Mr. Thompson finished his assessment, documenting the unauthorized occupancy and property damage, including the trampled roses. As he prepared to leave, he turned to Emily and Jake. "I should inform you that continuing to occupy this property without the owner's consent could result in legal consequences." Emily looked at me with hatred. "You're just like her. You know that? Grandma always loved you best, always gave you everything, and now you're just as cold and cruel as she was." I thought about my grandmother then, about her strength, her foresight, her ability to see people for who they really were. She'd known this day might come, had prepared for it, had made sure I would be protected. "You're right about one thing, Emily," I said quietly. "I am like my grandmother, and that's exactly why you can't stay here." The next few days were a storm of emotional manipulation that would have made a soap opera writer proud. Emily and Jake refused to leave, claiming tenant rights despite never having signed a lease. My mother called hourly, alternating between tears and guilt trips. Even my stepmother got involved, showing up at my office unannounced to discuss the situation. "You're being unreasonable, Olivia," Linda, my stepmother, said, as she sat across from my desk uninvited. She was wearing the pearl necklace that had once belonged to my mother, something she'd found in the attic years ago. "Emily is family. Your father would be devastated to see you treating her this way." I continued reviewing contracts on my laptop, not bothering to look up. "Dad lost any say in this property the moment he married you, Linda. Grandmother made sure of that." "That spiteful old woman," Linda spat, her carefully maintained composure cracking. "She never accepted us as family, always treating Emily like an outsider, and now you're doing the same thing." That made me look up. Grandmother treated Emily exactly as she deserved, like someone who repeatedly tried to take advantage of our family's generosity. Sound familiar? Linda's face flushed. We both knew what I was referring to. The borrowed jewelry that never got returned. The family heirlooms had mysteriously disappeared only to show up in Emily's apartment. The trust fund Dad had drained for Emily's education. 3 failed attempts at college that ended in partying and dropped classes your father wanted, Linda began, but I cut her off. Dad wanted a lot of things, Linda. He wanted to sell grandmother's antiques to fund Emily's yoga teacher training. He wanted to remortgage the property to pay for her boyfriend's crypto schemes. Thank goodness he didn't have the authority to do any of that. I pulled out a thick folder and placed it on my desk. Would you like to see the documentation of every attempt you and Emily have made to claim ownership of my property? The forged signatures, the calls to real estate agents, the social media posts about your plans to flip the guest house. Linda's face went pale. You've been spying on us? No, I've been protecting what's mine. There's a difference. Just then my assistant knocked on the door. Miss Carter, the police are here about the restraining order. Linda's eyes widened. A restraining order against your own sister, stepsister. I corrected again, standing up. And yes, breaking and entering, property damage, harassment, it all adds up. Now if you'll excuse me, I have actual business to attend to. As Linda stormed out, I could hear her already on the phone with my mother, no doubt spinning the story to make me the villain. I didn't care anymore. Years of giving in, of keeping the peace, of letting them take advantage, it was all over. The police officers were professional and efficient, reviewing the property assessor's report and the documentation of Emily and Jake's illegal occupancy. Within hours they had served the restraining order, giving Emily and Jake 24 hours to vacate the premises. That evening I came home to find Emily sitting on my front steps, tears streaming down her face. It was a familiar sight. She perfected the art of crying on command years ago. How could you do this to me? She sobbed. We're sisters. I walked past her to unlock my door. We're not sisters, Emily. We're 2 people whose parents married each other, and you're trespassing. Where are we supposed to go? She demanded, following me inside despite my obvious dismissal. Jake and I can't afford rent anywhere decent in Boston. That sounds like a personal problem, I replied, setting down my briefcase. Maybe if you'd spent less time planning to steal my property and more time actually working, you wouldn't be in this situation. She gasped, affronted. I wasn't stealing. Dad promised. Dad promised a lot of things that weren't his to promise. I interrupted. Just like you promised Mom he'd love her forever right before he left her for Linda. That shut Emily up. We both knew the story, though she'd heard a very different version. In her world, my mother had been cold and career-focused, driving my father into Linda's waiting arms. In reality, Mom had been supporting our family while Dad found himself right up until he found himself in bed with my mother's yoga instructor. You have until tomorrow afternoon to get out, I said firmly. After that, anything left behind will be considered abandoned property, and you'll be arrested if you try to return. Emily's tears dried up, instantly replaced by a familiar sneer. You think you're so much better than us, don't you? Living in your big house, running your fancy company, but you're all alone, Olivia. No husband, no kids, no real family. Just property and money. Is that what Grandma would have wanted for you? I thought about my grandmother then, about our Sunday dinners together, the business lessons she taught me, the way she'd supported my dreams when everyone else told me to settle down and find a husband. Actually, I said quietly, this is exactly what Grandma wanted for me. She wanted me to be strong enough to stand up for myself, successful enough to be independent, and wise enough to see people for who they really are. So thank you, Emily. You and Linda taught me those lessons better than anyone. The next day, I worked from home to supervise their departure. A police officer stood by as Emily and Jake loaded their belongings into their van, my mother hovering anxiously nearby. Please, Olivia, she begged one last time. Think about what you're doing to this family. I watched as Jake carelessly tossed another box into the van, probably breaking whatever was inside. I am thinking about family, Mom. I'm thinking about grandmother and how hard she worked to build this legacy. I'm thinking about my real family, the one you and Dad left behind when you decided to replace us with shiny new models. My mother flinched. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, I replied, echoing my words to Emily. But property law is very clear, and so are restraining orders. As they finally drove away, Emily hanging out the window to shout obscenities, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The property was quiet again, peaceful, just like when grandmother was alive. I walked down to inspect the guest house, assessing the damage. Empty pizza boxes littered the floor, furniture had been carelessly shoved aside, and there were already stains on the carpet. But it was nothing that couldn't be fixed. Outside I knelt by grandmother's rose bushes. They were trampled but not destroyed. With care and attention, they would bloom again stronger than before. Just like me, the aftermath of Emily's eviction rippled through the family like a stone thrown into a still pond. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly had opinions about how I destroyed the family. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from distant cousins and old family friends, all eager to tell me how disappointed they were in my behavior. I have my own network of support, people who knew the real story. Sarah, my lawyer, had become more than just a legal advisor. She was a friend who understood exactly what I've been dealing with. Your grandmother would be proud. She told me over coffee one morning about a week after the eviction. She always said you had steel in your spine, even if you didn't know it yet. I smiled, thinking about the roses I'd spent the weekend carefully tending back to health. I wish she could see this. She always told me there'd come a day when I have to choose between keeping the peace and keeping my dignity. And you chose dignity. Sarah nodded approvingly. Though from what I hear, Emily and Linda aren't taking it well. That was an understatement. My stepmother had launched a full-scale social media campaign against me, posting tear-jerking stories about family betrayal and sisterly cruelty. Emily had joined in, sharing photos of herself sitting sadly in their motel room, lamenting how her heartless stepsister had left them homeless. What they didn't share, of course, were the real estate listings showing plenty of affordable apartments in their price range, or the job offers Emily had turned down because they were beneath her, or the money Jake had lost in his latest cryptocurrency scheme. My mother, caught between her current family and her only daughter, tried desperately to broker peace. She showed up at my office again, clutching a manila envelope. "Please just look at these," she begged, spreading photographs across my desk. They were old family pictures, carefully curated ones showing Emily and me together at various events. "See, you girls used to be so close." I picked up one photo taken at Emily's high school graduation. In it, I was helping her adjust her cap while she smiled at the camera. What the photo didn't show was how she borrowed my grandmother's vintage pearl earrings for the occasion only to lose them at the after-party. "We were never close, Mom," I said gently, pushing the photos back toward her. "You just wanted us to be so badly that you ignored everything that suggested otherwise." "That's not true," she protested. "Remember when you helped her move into her first apartment, or when you lent her money for her yoga certification? You mean the apartment she trashed, leaving me to pay for the damages because I co-signed the lease, or the certification she never completed despite taking the money?" My mother deflated slightly. "She's just struggling to find her path like your father did at her age. Dad struggled because he chose to mom. He had opportunities, support, a family who loved him. He threw it all away because he wanted an easier life with a younger woman who stroked his ego. And now Emily's following in his footsteps, expecting everyone else to clean up her messes." Tears welled in my mother's eyes. "You sound just like your grandmother." "Thank you," I said sincerely. "That's the highest compliment you could give me." As my mother left, I thought about my grandmother's final days. She'd been clear-minded until the end, making sure every detail of her estate was properly arranged. "They'll try to take it from you," she warned me. "Not just the property, but your sense of self. Don't let them." A month after the eviction, I received an unexpected visit from Jake. He looked different, humbled, almost. The swagger was gone from his walk as he approached my front door. "Can we talk?" he asked, shifting uncomfortably. "Alone?" I considered turning him away, but something in his demeanor made me curious. "5 minutes," I said, stepping onto the porch rather than inviting him in. "Emily and Linda." He started, then paused. "They've been lying about a lot of things." I waited, saying nothing. "The whole inheritance story, Emily made it up. Your dad never promised her anything. She saw the guest house as an opportunity. Linda encouraged it, said it was only fair since you had so much. And you're telling me this now because he ran a hand through his hair, looking embarrassed because I'm done with all of it. The lies, the schemes, the constant drama. Emily's already talking about her next plan, something about claiming squatters' rights or adverse possession. She and Linda are meeting with some sketchy lawyer who says they might have a case." I smiled slightly. "Let me guess. They want to argue that Dad's old spare key and occasional visits constitute some kind of implied ownership." Jake looked surprised. "How did you?" "Because I've been 3 steps ahead of them this whole time, Jake. Every claim they might make, every legal loophole they might try to exploit, it's all been anticipated and blocked. My grandmother didn't just leave me property, she left me the tools to protect it." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I'm starting to see that. Anyway, I thought you should know. And maybe you could put in a good word for me at your company. I actually have a business degree, believe it or not." Before I got caught up in Emily's world, I considered him for a moment. "Send your resume to HR. I can't promise anything, but if you're serious about turning things around, I might know of an entry-level position." After he left, I sat in my grandmother's old rocking chair on the porch watching the sunset. The roses were starting to show new growth, tiny buds promising future blooms. Like them, I had been pruned back hard but was growing back stronger. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Just got word. Linda and Emily met with Anderson and Wright about pursuing legal action. Want me to shut it down now or let them waste their money first?" I smiled, thinking of my grandmother's foresight. Anderson and Wright was a law firm we often worked with. They'd flag any potential case against me immediately. "Let them try," I texted back. Sometimes people need to learn lessons the hard way. As if on cue, my mother called. "Have you seen Emily's latest post?" she asked, her voice worried. "She's talking about taking legal action, claiming years of emotional manipulation, and promised inheritance." "Let her," I said calmly. "Some people only learn when they hit rock bottom. Emily and Linda have been floating on other people's support for too long. Maybe it's time they learn to swim on their own." There was a long pause. "You really have changed," my mother said finally. "No, Mom. I've just stopped pretending to be someone I'm not. Grandmother always saw me clearly, saw all of us clearly. She knew this day would come, and she made sure I'd be ready for it." As the sun set over my grandmother's property, my property, I felt a deep sense of peace. The drama wasn't over. Emily and Linda would undoubtedly make more attempts to claim what wasn't theirs, but I was ready for them, anchored by my grandmother's wisdom and my own growing strength. Sometimes I realize the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to stand alone rather than compromise who we are. My grandmother had taught me that not through words but through example. And now finally, I was living that lesson. 5 years have passed since the day I evicted Emily from my guest house. The property has transformed much like I have. The roses my grandmother loved now bloom more abundantly than ever, their fragrance filling the garden where I often sit and reflect on how much has changed. Emily and Linda's legal attempts failed spectacularly. Their lawyer, once he realized who he was up against, withdrew from the case, leaving them with hefty legal fees and no grounds to stand on. The experience proved to be a turning point, though not in a way they'd expected. Emily, faced with mounting debts and no one left to bail her out, finally had to grow up. She took the only job she could find as a receptionist at a small studio. It wasn't the glamorous teaching career she'd imagined, but it was honest work. Last I heard, she'd been promoted to studio manager, earning her position through actual effort rather than entitlement. Jake, true to his word, sent his resume to HR. He started in our company's data entry department, slowly working his way up to a junior analyst position. He and Emily broke up, but the split was amicable. They both realized they'd enabled each other's worst tendencies. Linda's social media campaign backfired when people started questioning her own role in the family drama. Old friends came forward with stories of borrowed items never returned, promises broken, and trust betrayed. She eventually moved to Florida, where she has apparently found a new family to attach herself to. My mother's journey was perhaps the most surprising. After watching Linda and Emily's schemes unravel, she started therapy, finally confronting the patterns of enabling behavior she developed since my father left. Last year she visited me at the house, looking at it with new eyes. "Your grandmother was right about everything, wasn't she?" she said, touching one of the roses gently. "About Dad, about Linda, about Emily, about you." "She saw people clearly," I replied. "No illusions, no wishful thinking, just truth." Mom nodded, tears in her eyes. "I wanted so badly to create a perfect blended family that I ignored all the red flags. I let them take advantage of you because it was easier than admitting I'd made mistakes. The guest house has found a new purpose now. I've turned it into a transitional home for young women leaving difficult family situations." Sarah helped me set up a foundation in my grandmother's name, providing not just housing, but also career guidance and financial literacy education. Emily heard about the foundation through mutual acquaintances. She sent me an email, the first direct communication we'd had in years. "I finally understand what Grandma Margaret saw in you. She wasn't cold or cruel. She was strong, and she made you strong too. I'm sorry I couldn't see that before. I'm trying to be better now, to earn things instead of taking them. Thank you for not giving in. I tried to steal what was yours. You taught me a harder lesson than anyone else ever could." I didn't respond, but I did add her name to the foundation's newsletter list. Sometimes the best closure comes not from confrontation or reconciliation, but from the quiet acknowledgement of growth. The roses bloom 3 times a year now, each cycle stronger than the last. I've learned their rhythm just as I've learned the rhythm of standing firm in my own truth. My grandmother's lessons live on, not just in legal documents and property deeds, but in the strength she helped me find in myself. Last week I sat in her old rocking chair, watching the sunset paint the garden in shades of gold. A young woman from the Guesthouse program joined me, clutching a cup of tea. "How did you know?" she asked quietly. "How did you know when it was time to stand up to your family?" I smiled, thinking of that day 5 years ago when I finally said enough. My grandmother taught me that family isn't about sharing DNA or living under the same roof. It's about respect, truth, and supporting each other's growth. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is set boundaries even when others call us cold or cruel for doing it. She nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the roses sway in the evening breeze. My grandmother's presence felt close in moments like these, her wisdom echoing through the garden she had loved so much. Some people might look at my life and see what Emily first accused me of. A successful but solitary woman married to her career rather than a person. But I see something different. I see strength, independence, and a legacy of wisdom passed down through generations of strong women. The roses will bloom again tomorrow and the next day and the day after that. And I'll be here, tending them just as I tend the boundaries that keep my life peaceful and purposeful. Some might call it cold. I call it clarity. And in the end, that's the greatest inheritance my grandmother left me. The clarity to see truth, the strength to stand in it, and the wisdom to help others find their way to it too.